Hey everyone, it's Dan Reeser and Robinson Berkey from the Wormhole Foundation. Thanks for taking the time to listen to us today. We wish we could be there, but appreciate you guys letting us record this ahead of time and tell you guys a little bit about interoperability and Wormhole itself. I also wanted to thank the Wormhole China team as well as Wilgish from our team for putting this whole event together with the Pith team. We really appreciate it and really enjoy working with you guys. Um, Quick intros. Robinson and I are both co-founders of the Wormhole Foundation. Been working together for quite a while now and have had a great time kind of building up our team at the foundation, as well as working with a lot of the different core contributors across the Wormhole ecosystem. If I was in the room, I would ask everyone to raise their hand if they knew what was on the screen, but I'll just go ahead and tell you. This is a cable running under the ocean that's connecting the internet across the world. So from China to the US, from the US to Brazil, from Brazil to Europe, there's cables running under the ocean connecting the world's internet. And I found this graphic as we were doing some research for this presentation. And the crazy thing we discovered is that a lot of these cables are actually owned by even a small group of Web2 companies. The orange cables here are all owned by Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. And as you can see across the orange and blue cables here, there's a ton of infrastructure that was built out over the last 50 or so years that has connected the global internet as we know it and enabled so much commerce and activity on top of that platform. And everyone in the room, I'm sure, knows the history of crypto and blockchain, so I won't go into the details of what that is. But what this graph is meant to show here is just the number of active blockchains that are live. This goes through around 2023, but the chart is clearly growing rapidly, and we believe will continue to accelerate exponentially as it gets easier and easier to build things like app chains, using things like the OP stack or the Cosmos SDK and others. And the same trend is also happening for activity moving from centralized exchanges to decentralized exchanges. As you can see here, this is the DEX to CEX volume percentage. So a lot of activity coming on chain, again, because user experience is improving. As a lot of you probably have seen with things like the Solana ecosystem and how easy and kind of enjoyable it is to use on-chain applications now, which is a really great trend to see. But as all of these blockchains are kind of flourishing and emerging, there has to be connectivity between all these chains, just like we saw with the connectivity of the internet. So the highest level definition of blockchain interoperability is just enabling isolated blockchains to communicate data. So it doesn't have to just be tokens. There's a lot of types of data that are communicated between blockchains every single day. And we'll get into some of those examples in a little bit here. Robinson's going to take you through this interoperability stack now.
So this is a helpful visual to better understand how to think about interoperability. So we have four layers of the stack here, and at the base layer we have Wormhole. We'll call this the messaging layer. Some people will call it the transport layer, the communication layer, etc. But for the purposes of today, we'll call it the messaging layer. So Wormhole is a multi-chain developer platform. So like Dan mentioned on the screen prior, it enables interoperability. So two blockchains are able to communicate with one another. Once you have this kind of base layer functionality, you're able to then do things on top of that, right? So a lot of us in this room are probably familiar with transferring assets. So once you have this layer, you're then able to do things like bridge tokens, bridge NFTs, do cross-chain swaps, what have you. And so here we have a few of the more popular solutions like a Mayan swap, Portal, Squid, USDC CCTP. These are all kind of like applications that you can enable once you have this base layer. And then as you move kind of further up the stack, you get what we call the aggregation layer. So the aggregation layer, the way to think about this is that they're going to expose a good user experience to the user and aggregate all the things below it in the stack, right? So you have the messaging layer that's connecting all these different chains. then all these like asset apps built on top of it, helping you kind of swap in and out of different assets. And then their job is to kind of aggregate all of that and then provide, again, that best user experience. And then you go one layer further up and you get to kind of this application layer, if you will. So for the purposes of today, we can think about it as wallets, right? So you have Backpack, Phantom, MetaMask, all popular wallets. And the idea here is that there's so much happening, for instance, from the bottom, from the messaging layer, where you can almost view it as like the railroad tracks, if you will. You're essentially aggregating all of this up to the wallet. And so the ideal user experience is maybe going from any native asset on any chain to any native asset on another chain. And so this is obviously very focused for the purposes of today on assets, but later we'll get into more use cases that are possible with interoperability. Next, we'll briefly go into what Wormhole is. And we've already obviously given quite a bit of teasers here, but Wormhole is the leading interoperability platform powering multi-chain applications and bridges at scale. And we'll get into what that means. So at its core, Wormhole enables blockchains to, and I often say, communicate with one another, send data or share data with one another. So you have a source chain, and you can think about that as, let's say, a Solana, and you're able to send to a target chain, send information. So you can think about this as like Ethereum. So there's a lot of graphics on the screen, but we'll just briefly go over this. So essentially, you have a source chain, and let's say you want to send an asset. So on the source chain, we have a few different contracts that Wormhole will deploy, and we will wait for finality to happen on said source chain. So let's say it's Ethereum. So we want to make sure that finality happens. Once that happens, the Guardian network will essentially approve whatever happened on the source chain indeed did happen. So that the Guardian network is 19 independent operators. These are actually top validator companies within the space. So we have P2P, Chorus One, Figment, Rockaway. So these are 19 separate, large, well-known entities, and 13 out of 19 of them need to come to consensus on every single message that goes through Wormhole. So then after you have that consensus, you have a relayer. And I like to think about this as almost like the mailman. So they'll pick up that message and then deliver it to the target chain. So in this example, we're saying Solana. And then the contracts on the target chain are able to receive and then action on said message. And all of this is happening under the hood to enable a given message to go through the Wormhole protocol, but so that you can also build applications on top of it. And the most simplest form or way to think about an application today is sending an asset from chain A to chain B.
And just to think back to a couple slides ago when he was walking you through the interoperability stack, the bottom layer, the messaging layer on that slide looked pretty simple. But when you actually, double click on that layer, this is actually what's happening behind the scenes. So this little this little ball here that's moving through, this is just, consider it like a package of data, a packet of data. So this could be governance data from Uniswap. This could be price feeds from Pyth. This could also be tokens going through Mayan or LiFi or one of these token bridges. So this message is carried through. He mentioned that there's this Guardian network. This is a really important part of Wormhole's security setup. So they make sure that every message going through the network is valid and should be allowed to kind of pass through to the other chain. And then, like Robinson said, the relayers, kind of the ones who pick up that message and deliver it where it needs to go on the target chain. So that last slide was it's really the foundation of Wormhole as a network. It helps operate messaging, which enables a lot of different products around it. Wormhole messaging is actually one of the products listed on this slide, and like I said, foundational to everything that Wormhole is. So developers on various chains and various companies are integrating sometimes directly with Wormhole messaging, which is probably one of the deepest integrations you can do, and requires a direct integration with messaging without some of these kind of abstraction layers or software development kits that make it a little bit easier or straightforward to build with. but sometimes the use case requires direct integration with messaging. So wormhole messaging itself, I'm actually going to start with number two, is a product that we have for building multi-chain protocols. Wormhole SDK is an abstraction of the Wormhole messaging product, which the software development kit is really, when I say abstraction, it just means it's almost like a simplified way of packaging this together for developers to go and use. And developers are using the Wormhole SDK to build multi-chain applications. So as opposed to multi-chain protocols at the messaging layer, they're using this to build multi-chain applications on a variety of chains across Wormhole. And then these two products are also foundational to the other three that Robinson's going to walk you through of NTT, Queries, and Connect.
And so you can probably guess by now, but Wormhole obviously enables interoperability, but at the end of the day, it is a multi-chain developer platform. So the goal is to have multiple different tools that any developer can come along and use to enable whatever action or whatever they want to build. So number three here, native token transfers is an open framework where you can take a token from one chain to another. So that essentially is completely owned by the developer. Those contracts are owned by the developer, not Wormhole, the protocol. And there's no vendor lock-in. So they're future-proof in the sense that, yes, Wormhole can be chosen as that security configuration to take that token from chain A to chain B. But you can, add in another provider in the future if you did need to or did want to. And I think that's really important and part of our ethos. We also have queries. So you can think about messaging as kind of pushing data to another chain and queries as pulling data to another chain. And both of those are kind of these important primitives to make sure that you can provide a developer that's building multi-chain with the tools they need to do whatever they want in a secure and decentralized way. And lastly is Wormhole Connect. And Connect is like a reference implementation so that any developer can easily pick up this widget of sorts and embed it in the front end of their application. So with as little as few lines of code, you can have cross-chain deposits and cross-chain swaps natively in your application. You don't have to go to another website, or the user, doesn't have to go to another website. You can have that natively in your application in a super easy way. And so this is just a big toolkit for developers to do anything they want multi-chain.
And one thing I'll mention is that the products that you see on the screen now is a snapshot as of April 2024. This was smaller if you went back a year, and it's going to be much bigger if you look forward in 1 year. So what you'll notice as you get to know the Wormhole contributors is that we build products that developers need and are asking for, and we're really out here to solve problems for developers. So NTT was built, for example, as a framework for people who don't want to be locked into a standard that is being forced on various tokens around the industry. Queries was built for teams who needed to pull data more cheaply. And Connect was a problem that we solved because teams were having to send users away from their application to do bridging. And we said, okay, why don't we bring that experience into your application? So various teams across Sweep, across the Ethereum ecosystem, across the Phantom ecosystem, and others are integrating Wormhole Connect directly into their application to allow users to transfer tokens in and out of their application without having to even leave the app itself. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on messaging. We mentioned both of these things kind of indirectly on the graphic a few slides ago, but Wormhole messaging is essentially is comprised by verification, which is done by the Guardians today, and then relaying, which we said is what kind of brings that message to the destination. But one thing to mention here is that the Wormhole Guardians is one of the most respected kind of security and verification methods in the industry. The Uniswap Foundation actually commissioned a bridge assessment report, which rated Wormhole the #1 interoperability protocol in the industry based on security and decentralization practices. The Wormhole Guardians were a big part of that result for Wormhole. But one thing to mention, Wormhole ZK is also coming very soon. There's a ZK roadmap that you can read on the Wormhole website, which gets into a lot of detail about why we're building this. But essentially, this is moving Wormhole to a near trustless setup so that we can remove trust from the system and allow what's called a ZK-like client on the source chain and on the destination chain communicate data without having to use any sort of trusted entities such as these guardians. So Wormhole ZK has onboarded around 4 different contributors: Lurk, Spoken, Succinct, Supranational, and then AMD is the hardware provider for all of the Wormhole ZK products. So we're really excited about Wormhole ZK and standing up trustless transfer corridors between several different chains across the industry. So that's coming soon this year. We also wanted to just go through a quick kind of overview of the key integrations, various collaborations or partnerships that we have around the industry. One that I just mentioned is AMD, and you may be wondering what exactly we're doing with AMD. So AMD is providing hardware for various Wormhole contributors who are going to be operating these light clients that are heavily intensive on computation, and you need to have the best of the best hardware to be able to run these programs. So AMD is providing hardware for us that are going to run these ZK Lite clients, and they're also providing their internal as well as external expertise on how to optimize and accelerate this hardware so that we can have as cost-effective transactions for our users, so minimizing cost, and then as fast as possible so that the transactions are processing as quickly or faster than the current transactions do using the Wormhole Guardians. Another one I'll touch on here is the Backpack integration. So Backpack is one of the leading wallets in the industry. Started on the Solana ecosystem, but also support EVMs now as well. And Backpack just recently integrated Wormhole directly in their application, sorry, in their wallet. So in your browser, you're using Backpack. Let's say you have some USDC on Solana and you want to send that to the Ethereum ecosystem, you can do that directly in your Backpack wallet, and that is using Wormhole on the back end, which was actually a great example of an integration of the Wormhole SDK that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, for the sake of time, I'll just give one more example. It's Wormhole's involved in many different protocols, so we could probably talk about this for quite some time. But I think it's important to also highlight the non-asset use cases, right? Those are bountiful and there's plenty, but there's also plenty pure messaging use cases as well. And Uniswap is a great example. So Dan mentioned earlier the assessment that Uniswap commissioned and how Wormhole was the one approved to be essentially the provider for cross-chain governance messages. So Uniswap is essentially trusting Wormhole to shuttle any sort of governance messages from their home mainnet deployment to any other deployment where Uniswap or any other chain where Uniswap is deployed. Which is extremely important when considering that these governance choices can be things that affect the entire protocol. So we're extremely excited about the work we're done with Uniswap, and we are now securing about 6 deployments.
And we don't need to go through each of these, but this is just to give you an example of some more categories of use cases that are built on the Wormhole platform. Obviously, we're integrated with several different blockchains. Right now, it's over 30 different chains. DeFi applications, governance, as we've mentioned, lots of different bridging protocols. Cross-chain NFTs, such as the DeGods and y00ts, who have gone cross-chain several times actually using Wormhole and will continue to do that more. And then a newer class of applications that we're calling natively cross-chain or natively multi-chain applications. This includes teams like Pike and Synonym, Magpie, and Hashflow. Pike and Synonym are interesting examples of teams who have been building multi-chain from day one, as opposed to building an application on one chain and then trying to figure out multi-chain, a year or two down the road. So definitely look into Pike and Synonym as well as, Magpie and Hashflow building out these interesting multi-chain use cases. So speaking of use cases, we're going to go into a couple examples here. We can actually skip this slide because Robinson already mentioned this. Just to be clear, this is taking ETH mainnet decisions made by the Uniswap governance DAO and sending those decisions off to chains like Optimism and Base, Moonbeam, and others using Wormhole. Skip a slide. This is an example of a token bridge built on Wormhole. So Portal Bridge is a bridge that's been built using Wormhole messaging behind the scenes. And if you haven't used it, I would encourage you to go just test this out and see what it's like to actually use an application built on Wormhole. It's pretty simple. You just connect the wallet. In Ethereum's case, you'd be connecting something like MetaMask. Solana's case, you would connect a Backpack or Phantom or Soulflare wallet and simply choose the asset. In this case, it's USDC. Send 10 from Ethereum to Solana, and you should receive it on the other end pretty soon after. So this is just one example, and one of the bigger use cases as far as volume, as you can see on this slide. So this is actually a screenshot I took about 10 minutes ago. So this is the last 7 days of volume going through Portal. So on the left, you see source chain. And think back to the slide Robinson showed with the graphic. This is actually a source chain example of this use case. And on the right, it's the target chain. So in Ethereum's case, there's been 150 million sent from Ethereum to these chains on the right. So Solana has had the most inbound traffic from Ethereum. Sui has a lot of inbound, and then BSC or BNB chain has had, I guess, the third most volume coming in from Ethereum. And if you want to check this out, this is wormholescan.io, and there's a lot of cool and interesting data that you can see about Wormhole on that site. And then just one other example of actually on Wormhole Scan as well, just to see how much demand there is for stable coins as well that are going through Wormhole. So USDC is a big user of Wormhole with our integration with CCTP. So we're definitely happy to support them with more and more integrations over time. And actually just working on several different deployments with them on USDC. Another example here that Robinson will walk through.
And I just want to say hey to all our Pyth friends in the room as well. Thanks for doing this with us. And anyway, I think this is a great example of a good partnership and a fantastic integration. So for those of you who aren't familiar, and again, I know there's a lot of Pyth folks in the room. So Pyth and Wormhole work closely together. Wormhole is a core infrastructure provider for Pyth. So we help enable all Pyth price feeds to go cross-chain. And candidly, Pyth has been expanding so quickly and so successfully, it's hard to keep up with chains. So this number is probably out of date, but we've got 45 plus chains here. And I think from a Wormhole perspective for a second, this is a great example for us of product market fit. So there's obviously a lot of product market fit in this idea of just getting assets across all these different chains when you couldn't before. But this is a really interesting messaging use case or messaging product market fit. When you think about Pyth, this team did such an amazing job of securing 90% plus of the TVL. And some of the folks in the room can probably correct me if I'm wrong, specifically on Solana. And it's like, okay, we've been so successful here because of our model and our high quality data and how fast we can expand to chains and support new price feeds. How do we take this model to all these other chains, the rest of the on-chain world, if you will? And so it was just kind of this perfect opportunity to have Wormhole pick up these price feeds and deliver them to these chains. And you can kind of see here where Pyth's obviously this is daily average updates. You can see a lot of this on Solana around the May-June timeframe. And then, with Wormhole, kind of that exponential growth that comes with it. So if we want to go to the next slide, you can also see the kind of up and to the right chart for Pyth when it comes to the apps and integrations. This is obviously a testament to their fantastic product and ability to expand fast.
Cool. Couple more slides just to get into what you may be able to expect from the interop space as well as Wormhole. So I mentioned ZK. So ZK is going to be a major theme for the Wormhole ecosystem going forward. This, as I mentioned earlier, just to touch on this one more time, is enabling trustless transfers that we believe is the end game for interoperability. So removing trust from the system is always kind of the ethos of crypto. We, as Wormhole contributors, believe a couple things are very important. One being open source. You would be surprised how many teams, even in the interop space, are not actually open source, which is core to the ethos of why crypto is even here in the first place, as well as decentralization. Wormhole and Axelar are two of the most decentralized interoperability protocols in the world, and we're definitely very proud of that. But that also lines up well with removing trust. So we're going to continue working on building as much ZK into the Wormhole ecosystem as possible. Sorry, let's go back.
So a lot of us are familiar with RWAs, and in the interest of time, we won't go too deep into this. But for real world assets are becoming more and more popular. We're seeing more and more institutions, bring assets on chain. And so once you have these assets on chain, how do you get them? Just same mental model with any other token, but tokens maybe that are native to blockchains or minted on blockchains. How do you get these tokens cross chain? How do you make the idea from a user perspective of what chain you're on? How do you make that extinct, for lack of a better word? So RWAs and these institutions that are tokenizing these assets and bringing them on chain are going to need to figure out a way to, whether it's going from a private blockchain instance to the public blockchain network like Ethereum, Solana, L2s, et cetera, or just bringing them on chain to a public network and having them go intra-public network. This is just going to present the same set of issues we've already seen for the past 5+ years, but now from a real world asset perspective. So we're going to see more and more of this in the coming year. And blockchain abstraction. So I think a lot of people in this space talk about user experience. How do we make user experience better, et cetera? And I would make the case that interoperability protocols or multi-chain protocol like Wormhole is how you do that. The idea of having to go through to these different blockchains and actually, from a user perspective, understand what network you're on or what network you're using an application on, having gas fees in those tokens, and all these little things is actually a ton of friction to presenting an experience that is somewhat similar to an online experience, if you will. And so Wormhole being kind of this mesh network, this interconnectivity layer between all these blockchains, and at the app layer, we feel that this is what's going to help unlock a better user experience. And we're already seeing that today in the wallets, with games, et cetera. So we're going to see more user experience get better and better over 2024.
Cool. Well, just to wrap up, thanks again for the team, the Pyth team, the Wormhole China team for putting this together, and for everyone in the audience paying attention to the presentation today. We hope you learned a little bit more and some new things about interoperability, and also learned how Wormhole works kind of behind the scenes, some of the key teams that we're working with, and what the future looks like for Wormhole. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for having us.